Have you ever had an argument with someone who was clearly wrong, but somehow you ended up apologizing? You explain what they did, they change the subject. You explain how it made you feel, they tell you that you're overreacting. You bring up what actually happened, and somehow you're suddenly defending yourself. Then comes the part that makes it even more frustrating. They never apologize. Not really. Maybe they say, "I'm sorry you feel that way," or "Sorry, but you made me do it," or "Fine, I'm sorry." But somehow, none of it feels like an apology. So why do some people find it almost impossible to admit that they're wrong? Why would someone rather destroy a relationship than simply say 2 words? "I'm sorry." The answer can have a lot to do with something people rarely want to admit about themselves. Their ego. For some people, admitting they're wrong doesn't feel like admitting they made a mistake. It feels like admitting that they're a bad person, and if being wrong threatens the way they see themselves, they'll do almost anything to protect that image. Instead of thinking, "I made a mistake," their mind goes somewhere else. "They misunderstood me. They're being too sensitive. They started it. They're just trying to make me look bad." Suddenly the problem isn't what they did. The problem is the person who confronted them. And this is where arguments can become extremely difficult. Because you're trying to resolve what happened, while they're trying to protect their versions of themselves. There's another reason some people avoid apology. Control. An apology means admitting that someone else has a legitimate reason to be upset with you. And for people who are very uncomfortable with vulnerability, that can feel like losing control. If they admit they are wrong, they have to give up their position. They have to acknowledge that you were hurt. They may have to change their behavior. And most importantly, they have to accept that they aren't always right. For someone with a fragile ego, that can feel threatening. So instead of apologizing, they defend themselves. They explain, they justify, they attack. They bring up something you did 6 months ago. And suddenly an argument about what they did yesterday becomes a trial about everything you've ever did wrong. This is sometimes called whataboutism. Instead of addressing the original problem, they introduce another problem. You say, "Why did you lie to me?" They say, "Why were you looking at my phone?" You say, "That doesn't answer my question." They say, "Well, you're not exactly perfect either." And now you're no longer talking about the lie, you're defending yourself. And that's the trick. The original issue disappears. There are also people who use apologies strategically. They know that eventually you'll get tired. You want peace. You want the argument to end. So they wait. They stay silent. They refuse to move. And eventually you become the person who reaches out. You apologize just to restore the relationship. And they learn something. They learn that if they hold out long enough, you'll eventually take responsibility for both sides. And once that pattern becomes established, it can become very difficult to break. But there's something important. Someone who struggles to apologize isn't automatically a narcissist. Not every defensive person has a personality disorder. Sometimes people simply grew up in environments where admitting mistakes was punished. Maybe they were constantly criticized. Maybe saying "I was wrong" made them feel weak. Maybe they learned early in life that the safest thing to do was defend themselves. That doesn't make the behavior healthy, but it can explain where it comes from. And understanding the reason behind someone's behavior doesn't mean you have to tolerate it. That's an important distinction. You can understand why someone behaves a certain way and still decide that you don't want that behavior in your life. Because eventually the question isn't, why won't they apologize? The better question is, what happens when they hurt me? Do they eventually take responsibility? Do they listen? Do they try to understand your perspective? Do they change their behavior? Or does every conflict somehow becomes your fault? Because that's the real difference. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone gets defensive sometimes. Everyone says things they regret. The real problem isn't making a mistake. It's being completely incapable of taking responsibility for one. A healthy person can eventually say, "I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. I understand why that hurt you. And most importantly, I'll try not to do it again." That's when an apology is supposed to accomplish. Not winning, not losing, not proving who's right, just acknowledging that your actions affected another person And if someone repeatedly refuses to do that, you may eventually find yourself in a relationship where you're always carrying the emotional responsibility for both people. You're always explaining, you're always forgiving, you're always trying to fix things, and they're always defending themselves. That's exhausting. So the next time someone refuses to apologize, don't focus only on the words they won't say. Watch what they do instead. Do they take responsibility? Do they try to repair the damage? Do they change? Because sometimes the most important apology isn't the one someone says, it's the behavior that comes after. And if someone keeps hurting you, keeps denying it, and keeps making you responsible for their actions, then their refusal to apologize may already be telling you everything you need to know.